My name is Arthur Pendleton. For 40 years, I taught history to teenagers who were mostly just waiting for the bell to ring, but every now and then, a spark would catch in a young mind, and for a moment, the vast, intricate tapestry of the past would unfurl for them. Those were the moments I lived for. Now, in my 64th year, I am retired. My world has shrunk to the size of a small craftsman bungalow in Port Blossom, Oregon, a town that smells of damp earth and roses. My life's great project, however, has not been my career or even this house, but my son, Leo. Leo is my world, my late wife Eleanor's parting gift to me. He has her artist's soul, her deep, contemplative eyes, and a spirit that has always seemed too fine for the coarse fabric of the everyday world. He lives with me in the room that was once his childhood sanctuary, now a repository for his half-finished canvases and aspirational dreams. At 27, he is still finding his way, and I have always believed my role was to provide the safe harbor from which he could eventually set sail. On the day of his 27th birthday, the last Tuesday in May, the harbor felt particularly calm. The sky was a soft, forgiving gray, and the scent of the climbing Cecile Brunner roses I'd nurtured for a decade perfumed the air. In my hands, I held my gift to him, a first edition of Rilke's Duino Elegies, a book he'd once called the gospel of his artistic soul. It had taken me 6 months and a small fortune from my pension to track it down through a rare book dealer in London. I'd wrapped it in simple brown paper, tied with a piece of twine from the garden shed. I walked through the house, the floorboards sighing gently under my weight, each one a familiar note in the quiet symphony of my home. From the back patio, I could hear the murmur of voices and the easy cadence of laughter. Leo had invited a few friends over for a small barbecue. I'd bought the artisan sausages he liked and a case of craft IPA, leaving them on the kitchen counter with a note before I went out to run my errands. I wanted him to feel like the host, the master of his own celebration. Pausing at the sliding glass door, I looked out into my garden. It's my other great love, a place of order and quiet growth. The delphiniums stood like blue sentinels against the fence, and the lavender buzzed with contented bees. Leo was standing near the old charcoal grill, a bottle of beer in his hand, his back to me. His friends, Chloe and Sam, sat at the wrought iron table. "This is a great setup, man," Sam said, his voice carrying clearly on the still air. "Your dad's garden is like something out of a magazine." Leo took a long drink from his bottle, then gestured vaguely at the house with it. "Yeah, well, it's his kingdom. Every petal has its designated place. Just like me." I froze, my hand on the door handle. The book in my other hand suddenly felt heavy, its corners sharp against my palm. Chloe, a young woman with kind eyes who I'd always liked, offered a gentle defense. "He just wants the best for you, Leo. He's so proud of your painting." "Proud?" Leo's laugh was brittle, a sound I'd never heard from him before. "It didn't fit in my garden. He's proud of the idea of me being a painter. He doesn't understand the reality. The struggle. He just hovers." "Have you applied for any grants, Leo? Have you considered teaching part-time, Leo? It's like living with a guidance counselor who never clocks out." My breath caught in my throat. I had said those very words to him just last week, hoping to be helpful, to show my support in a practical way. "Man, I get it," Sam chimed in, leaning back in his chair. "My folks are the same. They don't get that the world's different now. You can't just walk into a job and get a pension like they did. The pressure is insane." "Exactly," Leo said, turning to face them, his profile now visible to me. He looked animated, energized by the shared complaint. "I love him, I guess, but honestly, sometimes I feel like I can't breathe in this house. It's his life, his rules, his perfectly manicured garden. The best gift he could give me for my birthday would be to just let go. Disappear for a while. Let me figure things out on my own, without him watching my every move." The words didn't hit me like a blow. They were quieter, more insidious. They were like a poison seeping into the soil of my world, turning everything I thought was solid and nurturing into something toxic. 27 years of lullabies, of scraped knee kisses, of tuition payments and encouraging words, all of it twisting into a cage he was desperate to escape. I backed away from the door, my steps silent on the flagstone path. I retreated into the quiet of my living room, sinking into the worn armchair that faced the empty fireplace. The wrapped book lay in my lap, a testament to a misunderstanding so profound it felt like a chasm had opened at my feet. I had seen myself as a gardener, tending a rare and beautiful plant. He saw me as the fence, choking his growth. Through the window, I watched them. They had moved on to another topic, their laughter now just a distant, meaningless sound. My son, celebrating his life in a home provided by a man he wished would vanish. My chest ached with a hollowness that was deeper than anger, colder than hurt. It was the chilling emptiness of disillusionment. I had spent my life teaching history, the grand story of human folly and misunderstanding. It seemed I had failed to learn its most basic lesson in my own home. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do next. The man who had always had a plan, a lesson, a piece of advice, was utterly lost. I sat in the armchair for what felt like an eternity, the cheerful sounds from the garden a cruel counterpoint to the silence that had fallen inside me. The Rilke book lay on the ottoman, its simple wrapping a mockery of the complex, painful truth I now faced. I had always believed that love, given patiently and unconditionally, would be enough. I now saw that my love had become a crutch, and Leo had used it so long he'd forgotten how to walk on his own. More than that, he resented it. My mind, usually a quiet library of historical facts and poetic lines, became a frantic slideshow of memories, all recontextualized by what I had just heard. Last year's art fair, where I'd paid for his booth and helped him hang his canvases. He'd introduced me to a potential buyer as his patron, a word that had sounded sophisticated then, but now stung with the implication of a transactional relationship. The time I'd gently suggested he take a part-time job at the local bookstore to have some income of his own. He'd looked at me with such wounded betrayal. "You want me to sell other people's words instead of creating my own art?" he'd asked, and I had immediately backed down, ashamed for having tried to clip his wings. I hadn't been nurturing him. I had been enabling him. My home wasn't a harbor, it was a gilded cage I'd built with my own loving hands, and he was rattling the bars, wishing the zookeeper would disappear. The pain began to coalesce into something new, something sharp and clear. It was the crystalline clarity of resolve. With a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from the very foundations of the house, I stood up. I walked back to the sliding door, my steps no longer hesitant. I slid it open and stepped onto the patio. The three of them looked up, their conversation halting. Leo's face held a flicker of apprehension, the look of a child who suspects he's been caught. "Leo," I said, my voice calm and even, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Could I have a word with you, please?" He glanced at his friends, a small, embarrassed shrug in his shoulders. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" He followed me to the far side of the garden, near the bed of irises that were just beginning to fade. I turned to face him, the scent of damp earth and roses all around us. "I was at the door a few minutes ago. I heard what you said to Chloe and Sam." The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like the 7-year-old who had broken my favorite reading lamp. But the shame was fleeting, quickly replaced by a defensive wall. "Look, Dad, I didn't mean," he started, but then he seemed to change his mind. He straightened up, lifting his chin in a gesture of defiance I knew all too well. "Actually, you know what? I did. I meant it. I'm suffocating here." Suffocating, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "In the home I provide for you? With the food I buy for you? Surrounded by the garden I tend for you?" "It's not about the stuff," he said, his voice rising. "It's about the expectations. The constant, quiet pressure. You map everything out. You have this whole idea of who I should be, and I can't live up to it. And I'm tired of trying. The only thing I have ever expected of you, Leo, is that you try. That you take some responsibility for your own life." My voice remained quiet, but there was a core of steel in it now that I hadn't used in years. "You are 27 years old. Your mother was married and pregnant with you at 27. I was teaching, paying a mortgage, building a life. I'm not you," he shot back, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and shame. "The world isn't the same. You don't get it. You think a part-time job is the answer to everything. You don't respect my art, my process. I respect your art so much that I have funded it exclusively for the last 5 years, I said, the truth of it landing between us with a heavy thud. But art does not absolve you from the basic requirements of adulthood. Wishing your father would disappear is not a plan for the future, Leo. It's a child's fantasy. Maybe it is, he said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Maybe I just want to be left alone. Maybe I want to make my own mistakes without you there to critique them and then pay to fix them. Is that so wrong? I looked at my son, this beautiful, lost boy who saw my love as a burden. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But something else was present, too, a sad, profound sense of release. He was right about one thing. It was time for me to let go. Not just for his sake, but for my own. My life had become a waiting room for his to begin, and I was weary of the vigil. No, I said softly. It's not wrong to want that. I turned and walked back toward the house without another word. I could feel his confused stare on my back. I slid the door closed, and the sound of it clicking shut felt like the closing of a chapter, a long, painful chapter of my life. I walked into my study, a room lined with books and maps, a room that had always been my sanctuary. I sat at my old oak desk and looked out the window at the party. Leo had rejoined his friends and was now performing an exaggerated, mocking version of our conversation for their entertainment. They were laughing. My son was laughing at my pain. In that moment, the historian in me took over. History teaches us that change rarely comes from gentle persuasion. It comes from collapsed empires, from revolutions, from moments when the old structures can no longer bear the weight of their own contradictions. My little domestic empire was about to have its revolution. Leo wanted me to disappear. He wanted to be left alone to figure things out. Fine. I would give him his wish. But an architect of one's own life must first learn to build on solid ground, not on foundations provided by someone else. It was time to clear the lot. The quiet of my study was a balm. Outside, the party continued, its muted sounds a reminder of the world I was about to dismantle. I didn't reach for the phone immediately. First, I sat at my desk and pulled out a simple ledger book, the kind I used to track household expenses. For an hour, I went through bank statements and credit card bills from the past year, my pen scratching methodically across the page. Rent, based on local market rates for a room in a house like this, $850 a month. Utilities, food, internet, car insurance for the vehicle he used as his own, another $600. Add in the art supplies, the workshop fees I'd covered, the loans that were never repaid. The number at the bottom of the page was stark and unforgiving. I was spending nearly $20,000 a year to subsidize the life of a man who wished I would vanish. The cost was not just financial. The true cost was my own peace, my own future, my own self-respect. My decision, born of hurt in the garden, now had the cold, hard backing of logic. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the Port Blossom Police Department. I explained the situation calmly. I was the homeowner, there was a party on my property, and I wanted my guests, all of them, to leave. 20 minutes later, a single patrol car pulled up quietly to the curb. A woman officer, her name tag reading Sutton, walked up my front path with a calm, professional demeanor. I met her at the door. "Mr. Pendleton," she asked, her voice low. "Yes. Thank you for coming, officer." I led her through the house to the back patio. The appearance of a uniformed officer had an immediate and sobering effect. The music, which someone had turned up, was abruptly silenced. Chloe and Sam stood up, their faces etched with alarm. Leo stormed over, his face a thundercloud of indignation. "Dad, what the hell is this? You called the cops on my birthday party." "I am simply asking everyone to leave my property," I said, my voice steady. I addressed the small group. "The party is over. I need you all to go home now." Officer Sutton stepped forward. "Folks, you heard the homeowner. He's asked you to vacate the premises. It's time to pack it up." Chloe and Sam began gathering their things immediately, murmuring apologies as they scurried toward the side gate. They were young, but they understood authority and consequences. Leo, however, was trapped in the bubble of his own making, a place where consequences were always absorbed by me. "No, This is my home, he declared, planting his feet on the flagstones I had laid myself. You can't kick me out of my own home. Officer Sutton looked from Leo to me, her expression patient but firm. Son, is your name on the deed to this house? No, but I live here. I have rights. Actually, she said, her tone becoming a little less patient, as a guest in your father's home, you have the right to leave when he asks you to. If you refuse, it's called trespassing. The legal term hung in the air, foreign and sharp. I saw the calculation in Leo's eyes. He looked at me, expecting me to fold, to smooth things over as I always had. He expected me to be embarrassed by this public display, to rescue him from the consequences of his own defiance. I just stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, and met his gaze. I said nothing. My silence was his answer. It was a language he had never heard from me before, and he didn't understand it. This is insane, he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. He looked at Officer Sutton. I'm not going anywhere. That's your choice, she said, her hand moving casually toward her belt. But it's a poor one. This is your last chance to walk out of that gate on your own. After that, I have to arrest you. Arrest me? His voice cracked. The bravado finally shattered, revealing the frightened boy underneath. For what? Criminal trespass, she stated flatly. Your father, the legal property owner, has asked you to leave. You have refused a lawful order for me to do so. It's very simple. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading anger. Dad, tell her to stop. Tell her this is a mistake. This was the moment. The culmination of 1,000 capitulations, 1,000 moments where I chose his temporary comfort over his long-term growth. The historian in me knew this was a turning point, a hinge of fate. My own and his. It's no mistake, Leo, I said, and my voice was gentle, filled not with anger, but with a profound and bottomless sorrow. You wanted me to let go. This is what letting go looks like. He just stared, his mouth agape, as Officer Sutton calmly took his arm. He didn't resist as she cuffed his hands behind his back. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a stunned, hollow shock. As she led him toward the side gate, he twisted around to look at me one last time. I'll never forgive you for this, he whispered, and the words were carried on the rose-scented air. I know, I whispered back to the empty garden. I watched the patrol car's taillights disappear down the street. The garden was quiet now, littered with the detritus of a party that had ended a lifetime ago. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Just the vast, aching quiet of a decision finally made. I had 10 days until his court date and subsequent release. 10 days to dismantle a life and, perhaps, begin a new one. The house was preternaturally quiet in the days that followed. The silence was a physical presence, filling the spaces once occupied by Leo's music, his late-night pacing, his sighs of creative frustration. At first, it felt like an accusation. But as the hours turned into days, the quiet slowly transformed into a kind of peace, a blank slate on which I could begin to write a new story. I spent the first 2 days in a fugue of memory, walking from room to room. I packed Leo's belongings into boxes. His paintings, some of them brilliant and hinting at a talent he was squandering, his books, their spines cracked from use, the worn t-shirts and jeans. Each item was a small stab to the heart. This wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of archaeology, digging through the layers of a life I had helped to build and now had to deconstruct. I labeled each box with his name in my neat, teacher's script and stacked them in the garage. On the 3rd day, I called Eleanor Vance. Her name was on a sign I'd passed 1,000 times in the village, her photo showing a woman with a kind, intelligent face. She specialized in selling the historic homes of Port Blossom. She arrived the next afternoon, her presence warm and professional. She admired the wisteria clinging to the porch, the original hardwood floors, the garden. This is a special place, Mr. Pendleton, she said, standing in the living room, her eyes taking in the decades of care I'd poured into the home. People will fall in love with it. Are you sure you want to sell? I'm very sure, I said, my voice steady. My circumstances have changed. I need to move quickly. I didn't offer details, and she was professional enough not to ask. We talked numbers. The house, which I owned outright, was my only significant asset. Its value was far more than I had realized. Enough to start over, somewhere new, somewhere quiet. "There's one condition," I told her as she prepared the listing agreement. "I need the sale to be final, with the new owners moved in within 7 days." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's an aggressive timeline, Arthur." "May I call you Arthur?" "Of course. And I understand. I'm willing to price it competitively to make it happen." She looked at me, her gaze perceptive. "This is more than a move, isn't it? It's a departure." "Yes," I said. "It is." The next few days were a blur of activity. Eleanor was a whirlwind of efficiency. A photographer came and made my home look like a spread in a lifestyle magazine. The for sale sign went up on the lawn. It felt like a monument to my failure as a father, but also, strangely, like a declaration of independence. The house went on the market on a Friday. There was an open house that weekend. I spent those 2 days at the library, reading, unable to bear the thought of strangers walking through my memories, assessing the value of the container that had held my life. On Monday morning, Eleanor called. "Arthur, we have 3 offers. All over asking. One of them is a young couple, the Ramirezes. He's a music teacher at the high school. She's a graphic designer. They wrote you a letter." She read it to me over the phone. They wrote about wanting to raise their children in a home with a soul, about their love for the garden, about how they could already imagine their daughter's piano in the living room. They sounded like me and my Eleanor, 30 years ago. "They can close in 2 days, Eleanor finished softly. "Sell it to them," I said without hesitation. The final days were spent in a kind of sacred ritual. I pruned the roses one last time, my shears making clean, decisive cuts. I patched the small nail holes in the walls and wiped down the baseboards. I was preparing the house for its new life and, in doing so, preparing myself for mine. I made arrangements to stay for a few nights with my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kindly widow whose front window had a perfect, unobstructed view of my, now the Ramirez's, front porch. I told her I was in between places, a simplification that was also the truest thing in the world. The day before Leo's release, I stood in the empty living room. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The house was empty, scrubbed clean of my life, of Leo's life. It was just a structure now, waiting for new memories to be made within its walls. On the kitchen counter, I left a single, sealed envelope addressed to Leo. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000, enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a small apartment, if he was wise. And a note. I had rewritten it a dozen times. It contained no anger, no recrimination. Just the simple, painful truth. "My dearest Leo, you asked for your own life, free from my interference. You wanted me to let go. I have. The house is sold. I am leaving Port Blossom to start a new chapter of my own. This is not a punishment. It is a fulfillment of your wish and a necessary step for my own peace. The enclosed check is the last financial help I will ever give you. Your life is now your own, to build or to squander. I pray you choose to build. I will always love you, but I can no longer carry you. It is time for you to learn to walk on your own 2 feet. Perhaps one day, our paths will cross again, and we can meet as equals. Goodbye, my son. Dad." I placed the keys on the counter beside the letter and walked out the back door, through the garden, and into Mrs. Gable's quiet, waiting home. The hardest part was over. All that was left was to bear witness. The morning of Leo's release dawned cool and clear. From the chintz-covered armchair in Mrs. Gable's living room, I watched the world wake up. The Ramirez family's minivan was already parked in my old driveway. A child's bicycle lay on its side on the lawn. Life had already moved on. At 9:30, just as Mrs. Gable had predicted, a taxi pulled up to the curb. Leo got out. He looked tired and pale, his shoulders slumped in the same hoodie he'd been arrested in. He walked up the familiar flagstone path, his gaze fixed on the front door, a man returning to a home he believed was waiting for him. He fumbled with his keys, a flicker of irritation crossing his face when the first one didn't work. He tried another. I watched his confusion mount as the lock refused to yield. It was then that he seemed to notice the unfamiliar minivan, the bicycle, the new welcome mat on the porch. The front door opened, and Mr. Ramirez stood there, holding a mug of coffee. He was a man about my age when I'd first bought the house, full of a quiet, hopeful energy. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "What are you doing in my house?" Leo demanded, his voice raspy. "Who are you?" "I'm sorry, but this is our house now," Mr. Ramirez said gently. "We bought it. We moved in yesterday." That's not possible," Leo stammered, shaking his head, the reality refusing to penetrate. "My father, Arthur Pendleton, lives here." "He sold it to us," Mr. Ramirez said, his expression softening with sympathy as he began to grasp the situation. "He left something for you, though. Wait here." He disappeared inside and returned with the envelope. Leo took it, his hands trembling. From my vantage point across the street, I watched him tear it open. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his posture change as he read my words. His shoulders, which had been squared with indignation, began to slump. His head bowed. The rigid anger seemed to dissolve, leaving behind something fragile and lost. He read the note a second time, then a third, as if trying to decipher a language he couldn't understand. The cashier's check fluttered from his fingers and landed on the porch steps, forgotten. He looked up at the house, his house, my house, now a stranger's house. He looked at the window of his childhood bedroom, where a new set of curtains now hung. He took a staggering step backward, off the porch, his heel catching on the edge of the lawn. He sat down hard on the grass, the fight, the defiance, the entitlement all gone. And he began to cry. It was not the angry, frustrated crying of his youth. It was the silent, racking sob of a man whose entire world had been pulled out from under him. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with a grief so profound it seemed to suck all the air from the quiet morning street. Mr. Ramirez said something to him, but Leo didn't respond. After a moment, the man retreated inside, closing the door softly, leaving my son alone with his reckoning. My own eyes burned with tears. This was not the victory I had imagined. There was no satisfaction, no feeling of justice served. There was only a vast, hollow ache. I had given my son the freedom he'd craved, and it had broken him. I had wanted to teach him to walk, but all I had done was kick the crutch out from under him and watch him fall. Mrs. Gable came into the room and placed a cup of tea on the table beside me. She didn't look out the window. "Sometimes," she said softly, her voice filled with a wisdom earned over 80 years of life, "the kindest thing a person can do is the hardest." I watched my son cry on the lawn of his past until he had no tears left. Eventually, he stood up on unsteady legs, picked up the check from the steps, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. He didn't look back at the house again. He just turned and started walking down the street, toward a future that was, for the first time in his life, terrifyingly, utterly his own. 2 days later, I was driving south on Highway 101, the Pacific Ocean a vast, glittering expanse to my right. My car, a reliable sedan with over 100,000 miles on it, contained everything I owned: one suitcase of clothes, a box of books I couldn't bear to part with, and my father's old fly fishing rod. The rest was just money in a bank account, a number that felt abstract and meaningless. I had no destination. For the first time in my adult life, I was not moving toward something, but simply moving. The road unspoled before me like a question mark. Who was Arthur Pendleton without a house to tend, a history to teach, or a son to worry about? I didn't know the answer. The image of Leo on the lawn was seared into my memory. It wasn't an image of triumph, but one of shared loss. In severing him, I had severed a part of myself. The part that had been a father. I had done what I had to do, what I believed was right, but the cost was immense. My love for him hadn't vanished. It had simply been transformed into a constant, low-grade ache, like a phantom limb. I stopped in a small coastal town whose name I didn't bother to learn. I rented a small, sterile motel room with a view of a parking lot. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about history. Not the grand sweep of civilizations, but the small, personal histories we build and inhabit. I had demolished mine. Leo was now forced to build his from scratch. Was it an act of love or an act of cruelty? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps true, transformative love is sometimes indistinguishable from cruelty. It is a fire that burns away the deadwood to allow for new growth. I had set the fire, and now I could only hope that something green and resilient would eventually rise from the ashes of my son's life. And from my own. My ending is unwritten. I might find a small town and become a regular at the local library. I might take up fly fishing again, seeking a different kind of peace in the quiet patience of the river. I might just keep driving until the road runs out. I don't know what will become of Leo. I pray the check was enough to give him a foothold. I pray the shock was enough to wake him up. I pray that one day, he will understand that the greatest gift I ever gave him was not a home or money or a rare book of poetry, but the terrifying, painful, magnificent gift of letting him go. Perhaps, years from now, I will get a letter. It will find me in some quiet corner of the world. It will be from a man who has built his own life, a man who stands on his own 2 feet. A man who finally understands. Or perhaps I will never hear from him again. I have to be at peace with that. I have to trust that the lesson, delivered with such brutal force, was received. I have to trust that I did the right thing. Because if I don't, the silence in my own heart will be unbearable. I have stepped out of his story, and now, finally, I must begin my own.